The first thing I saw that Wednesday morning was my husband's name on my phone, 7 missed calls before breakfast. My mother was sitting beside me in a hospital waiting room, and I already knew this wasn't about her. It was about his car. The night before, I had stood in our kitchen with my purse over my shoulder, trying very hard not to sound desperate. David, could I take the Highlander tomorrow? He was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone. The television in the living room was on some baseball game playing low in the background. My car is still at Miller's and Mom needs to get checked out. Marilyn can drive us, but she has to leave early. It would be a lot easier if I could just take yours. David didn't look up. No. I waited. David, I wouldn't ask if I had another option. He finally raised his eyes. That's not my problem. Figure it out yourself. I remember the refrigerator humming behind me. I remember the little red light on the coffee maker blinking because I had forgotten to reset the clock after a power outage the week before. And I remember thinking, did he really just say that my mother Evelyn was 82 years old? She had been complaining about feeling weak and lightheaded for several days. Her doctor's office had called that afternoon and told me to bring her in the next morning for an examination. My 2014 Honda Accord was sitting at Miller's Auto Repair with a transmission problem that was going to cost more than I wanted to think about. David's Toyota Highlander was sitting 10 feet away in our driveway. It wasn't like I was asking to borrow a sports car for a weekend trip. I needed to drive his wife and her elderly mother to the doctor. Still, I didn't argue. I just nodded. Okay. David went back to his phone. That was it. No discussion, no offer to call someone, no, I hope your mom's okay. Just that one sentence and then the television. I went upstairs and called my sister Carol. She answered on the 4th ring. Everything, all right. Mom needs to see the doctor tomorrow. What time? 8:30. There was a pause. I can't drive you, Linda. I've got that training at 9. I know. What about David? I looked toward the bedroom door. He said no. Carol sighed. Can Marilyn take you? I'll ask. Marilyn lived 3 houses down from Mom and had been one of her friends for years. She answered when I called around 8:30. Of course I'll take you, she said. Don't even worry about it. I nearly cried from relief. Thank you. Linda, it's a doctor's appointment, not a trip to the moon. I laughed despite myself. That may be the nicest thing anybody said to me today. She chuckled. I'll be there at 7. The next morning I was up before 6. I made coffee, packed Mom's medication list into a folder, checked that she had her insurance card, and made toast because she usually couldn't eat much when she was nervous. At 6:40 I called her. Mom, I'm coming over. I've been awake since 5, she said. Why? Because I'm 82 and apparently that's what we do. I smiled. You ready? As ready as I'll ever be. When Marilyn pulled into the driveway in her old Buick, I helped Mom into the back seat. She looked toward our house. David coming, I hesitated. No, he's working from home. That wasn't exactly a lie. He was sitting in the kitchen when I left. He didn't even come outside. At Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital, the morning was already busy. Wheelchairs moved through the lobby. Volunteers stood near the information desk. Someone's coffee had spilled near the elevators, and a maintenance worker was putting up a yellow sign. Real life, nothing dramatic. Just people trying to get through Wednesday morning. Mom had blood work done first. Then we waited. She sat beside me with her hands folded over her purse. You worried? I asked. A little, so am I. She gave me a sideways look. You always say you're not. I lie. She smiled. That was my mother. She could make a joke while waiting for a doctor to tell her whether something was wrong. Around 9:15 my phone buzzed. David. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. By the time the nurse called Mom's name, I had 5 missed calls. I stepped into the hallway and called them back. What? Where are you? At the hospital. I know you're at the hospital. Where's my car? I stared at the wall. You asked me to figure it out. So I did. There was silence. Then his voice sharpened. Linda, I need the Highlander. I don't have it. Then where are you with Mom? You could have told me. I almost laughed. I tried to tell you last night. You're making this into something it isn't. No, David. I'm not making anything into anything. He sighed like I was the difficult one. Just call me when you get back. I looked through the doorway. Mom was sitting on the examination table talking to the nurse. Okay, I hung up. 2 minutes later, another call came. Then another. I turned my phone face down. When the doctor finally came in, I put everything else out of my mind. Mom needed me. That's what mattered. But something inside me had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was more like noticing a crack in a wall that had always been there. Once you see it, you can't pretend you don't. And I had started seeing a lot of things differently. By the time the doctor finished with Mom, it was almost 11 o'clock, and I felt like I had been awake for 2 days. The doctor wasn't alarmed, which was the first good news I'd heard all morning. Mom's blood pressure had been a little high, and the doctor wanted more testing and a follow-up appointment. She also wanted Mom to keep a closer eye on her medications and make sure she was drinking enough water. Nothing here suggests an emergency, the doctor told us. But I don't want you ignoring these symptoms. Mom nodded. I won't. The doctor looked at me. And you make sure she doesn't. Mom gave me a look. I've raised her. She thinks she's in charge now. The doctor laughed. I laughed too. For a few minutes, everything felt normal again. Then I walked back into the hallway and looked at my phone. 7 missed calls from David. 7. There were also 3 text messages. Where are you? I need my car. Call me. I stood there staring at the screen. My first thought wasn't anger. It was concern. 7 calls felt like an emergency. Maybe something had happened at home. Maybe he'd fallen. Maybe there was a problem with his father. I called him immediately. He answered before the first ring finished, finally. I frowned. Is something wrong? Where's my car? I closed my eyes. David, I'm at the hospital with Mom. I know that. I already asked you. And I told you last night I wasn't taking the Highlander. You didn't tell me you were going to have Marilyn drive you. Why does that matter? Because I needed the car this morning. I looked down the hallway at Mom, who was slowly gathering her things. You didn't say that. I shouldn't have to. I almost laughed. David, I asked if I could use it because my car is at the repair shop. You told me to figure it out myself. I didn't mean you could just make some other arrangement without telling me. I leaned against the wall. You told me no. So I found another way. He was quiet. Then he said, you're being difficult. That sentence stayed with me, not because it was particularly cruel. I'd heard worse. But because it was so familiar. For years, whenever I stopped making things easy for David, I somehow became the problem. I lowered my voice. My mother is 82. She wasn't feeling well. I needed to get her to the doctor. I handled it. You could have called me. I did. You know what I mean. No, I said. Actually, I don't. He hung up. I stared at the phone. A few seconds later, it rang again. I didn't answer. When I returned to the waiting area, Mom noticed my face. David. Yes. Everything all right? Everything's fine. She raised an eyebrow. My mother had never been easy to fool. You're doing that thing. What thing? The thing where you say everything's fine while your forehead says the opposite. I smiled. I'm just tired. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Come sit. I sat beside her. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then Mom quietly asked, Did he help you last night? I looked at her. How did you know? Because I know you. I swallowed. He said no. Mom's expression changed. Not anger. Something quieter. Disappointment. He knew you needed to take me to the doctor, yes. She looked toward the floor. Well, that was all she said. We waited another 40 minutes for the discharge paperwork. Marilyn was kind enough to stay with us. She even stopped at a little diner near Clintonville and bought Mom soup and a grilled cheese sandwich because Mom said hospital food made everything taste like cardboard. At the table, Marilyn asked, So how many times has David called? I looked at my phone. 8. She nearly choked on her iced tea. 8. He wants his car. Marilyn shook her head. That's a lot of urgency for a Toyota. I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had all morning. Mom smiled too. But underneath that little moment of humor, I felt something uncomfortable. I had spent years explaining David, to my sister, to my mother, sometimes even to myself. He's tired, he's under pressure, he's just not good with emotions, he doesn't mean it that way. Maybe all those things had been true once. But there comes a point when explanations stop being explanations and start becoming excuses. That afternoon, Marilyn dropped us at Mom's house. I helped Mom inside, put her medications on the kitchen counter, filled a glass of water, and made sure she had something easy to eat. "You don't have to stay," she said. "I know. You have a husband waiting." I looked at her. "He can wait." Mom smiled. That sentence felt strangely good coming out of my mouth. I stayed another hour. When I finally drove home, the sun was already beginning to drop behind the houses. David's Highlander was sitting in the driveway. He was standing beside it with his arms folded. I parked behind him. He didn't say hello. "You've been ignoring me. I was with Mom. You could have answered. I was busy." He shook his head. "You know what? I don't understand you anymore." I took my purse from the passenger seat. "I think I understand you pretty well." He stared at me. "What is that supposed to mean?" I walked toward the front door. "It means I asked you for help, you said no, and I found help somewhere else." He followed me inside. "You made me look like a terrible husband." I stopped. "No, David." I turned around. "You did that part yourself." For once, he didn't have an immediate answer. He looked almost stunned. I went upstairs. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the previous evening. 24 years of marriage. 2 decades of holidays, mortgage payments, family birthdays, broken appliances, funerals, graduations, Christmas mornings, and ordinary Tuesdays. Was all of that really supposed to disappear because of one sentence, no? I wasn't going to throw away my marriage over one bad night, but I also couldn't pretend the sentence hadn't revealed something. The next morning, David came downstairs while I was making coffee. He opened the refrigerator. "Where's my lunch?" I looked at him. "You usually make it." He frowned. "Yeah." I took a sip of coffee. "I didn't today." He closed the refrigerator. "Why I set my mug down?" "Because yesterday you told me to figure things out myself." His face tightened. For a moment neither of us moved. Then he said quietly, "You're really going to do this?" I looked at him. "No." I picked up my coffee. "I'm going to stop doing everything for you." And that was the first time I saw something change in his expression. Not guilt, not anger, fear. That surprised. For the next few days I didn't make any big decisions. Me. I had expected anger to push me into action, but instead I found myself moving carefully, almost cautiously. I still loved David. 24 years doesn't disappear because of one ugly sentence over a kitchen table. But something had changed. I had stopped automatically fixing things. On Friday morning, I took Mom to her follow-up appointment. Her doctor wanted her to keep monitoring her blood pressure and come back in a few weeks. Nothing was urgent, but Mom had another round of tests scheduled. Afterward, I drove over home and sat with her at the kitchen table while she sorted through a stack of old mail. "You need to throw some of this away," I told her. "I might need it." "Mom, this electric bill is from 2019. You never know," I laughed. "That is exactly why I don't throw anything away." She smiled. Then she pulled an old envelope from the bottom of the pile. "This might be your father's." I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father had been gone for almost 9 years. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were several old bank statements, a photocopy of a trust document, and a letter from a financial institution in downtown Columbus. I frowned. "What is this?" Mom adjusted her glasses. "Your father set something up years ago." For me, I think so. I had completely forgotten about it. Dad had always been practical with money. He wasn't wealthy. He worked for decades at a manufacturing company outside Columbus and believed in saving a little from every paycheck. I took the documents home that afternoon. David was in the living room watching television. "What have you got there?" "Some papers from Dad." He nodded and went back to the television. I put them in the spare bedroom. That evening after David went to bed, I called the bank listed on the old documents. The woman on the phone told me I would need identification and several documents before she could discuss the account. The following Monday, I went to a branch near Easton Town Center. I sat across from a banker named Kara. She reviewed the paperwork for several minutes. Then she looked up. "Ms. Harris, this account is still active." I blinked. I didn't even know it was still there. She smiled. "Your father established a trust for you years ago. How much is in it?" She turned the monitor slightly. "About $86,000. I thought she had misheard me. 86,000. I sat back. It wasn't a fortune. It wouldn't buy a mansion or allow me to retire tomorrow, but it was enough to change how I felt sitting in that chair. Kara explained that I was the beneficiary and could establish a separate account under my name. I asked a dozen questions. She answered every one. When I walked out of the bank, I sat in my Honda and stared through the windshield. I didn't feel rich. I felt something else. Capable. That afternoon, I opened an account at another bank. I transferred my personal emergency savings into it. Then I went home and pulled together copies of our mortgage documents, insurance policies, tax records, and retirement statements. I wasn't planning a divorce. I wasn't plotting some dramatic financial revenge. I simply wanted to know what I had. For years, I had trusted that if something happened, David and I would figure it out together. But after the hospital incident, I realized I had been trusting without actually knowing. There was a difference. That evening, David came into the kitchen. "What are you doing?" "Organizing paperwork." He looked at the folders. What paperwork? House stuff, insurance, taxes, financial records. Why I closed the folder? Because I want copies. He stared at me. "You never cared about that before." "I should have." He walked away. I could tell he was bothered. The funny thing was, I was bothered too. I kept wondering whether I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Maybe this was overreacting. Maybe I should just forget it. Then David called from the hallway. "Yes. Can you pick up my prescription tomorrow?" I looked at the grocery list on the counter. I was already going to the pharmacy. The old me would have said yes immediately. Instead, I asked, "Why can't you?" He appeared in the doorway. "Because you're going that way." So he stared at me as though I'd suddenly started speaking another language. "You're already going." "I know, so just get it." I shook my head. "I won't." He frowned. "Why not? Because it's your prescription." He gave a short laugh. "You're serious?" "Yes." He walked away muttering something I couldn't hear. I smiled despite myself. There was something almost funny about watching a grown man discover that the pharmacy had not in fact been permanently assigned to his wife. A week later, he asked where his dry cleaning shirts were. "I don't know. You didn't pick them up." "No." "Why? Because they're yours." He stared at me. "You always know where everything is." "I used to." He shook his head. "You've changed." Maybe I had, but I didn't feel cruel. I felt awake. Still, the nights were harder. Sometimes I'd lie in bed beside him and remember the man I'd married. David at 37 carrying our daughter into the house after she fell asleep in the car. David fixing a broken cabinet door on Christmas Eve. David sitting beside my father during his last Christmas, quietly holding his hand when Dad couldn't talk much anymore. That man was real. So was the man who had looked at me when my mother was sick and said he didn't care. Both versions existed. That was what made this so difficult. One Thursday evening, David came home irritated. "Your sister called." I looked up from the kitchen counter. "Why?" She asked if everything was okay. I paused. "What did you tell her?" "That we're fine." I nodded. He leaned against the counter. "Did you tell her what happened?" "No." "Good." I looked at him. Why he didn't answer. That silence told me more than words could. He wasn't embarrassed by what he'd done. He was embarrassed that other people might know. That night, I sat at the kitchen table after he went upstairs. I opened the folder containing Dad's documents. Then I closed it again. I wasn't interested in punishing David. I wanted something simpler. I wanted to know that if life forced me to make a difficult choice, I could make it without waiting for someone else to give me permission. The next Sunday, we went to Evelyn's house for dinner. David was unusually quiet. Mom served roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and the apple pie she'd made that morning. Halfway through dinner, David said casually, "Linda's been acting strange lately." My sister looked at him. "How?" He shrugged. "She doesn't help me with anything anymore." I put my fork down. For the first time I realized he wasn't planning to let this go. He wanted an audience, and without knowing it, he had just chosen the wrong room. David had always been good at sounding reasonable. That was one of the things that made arguments with him so exhausting. He rarely shouted at first. He spoke calmly, slowly, like he was explaining something obvious to a room full of people who simply hadn't understood it yet. That Sunday at Mom's house was no different. We had just finished dinner. Carol was clearing plates. Mom was cutting the apple pie into uneven slices because she'd never believed in measuring anything. David leaned back in his chair. "Linda's been acting strange lately." Carol looked at him. "How?" He shrugged. "She doesn't help me with anything anymore." I kept my eyes on my coffee. Carol glanced at me, like what David started counting on his fingers. Laundry, dry cleaning, picking things up, little stuff. Mom set down her fork. "She's been taking care of me." David looked at her. "I know." "Do you?" His face tightened. I could feel the conversation turning. I had two choices: stay quiet and let David tell his version, or finally tell the truth. I took a breath. "Do you want me to tell them why David looked directly at me? Tell them why I stopped doing those things?" Carol slowly sat back down. David laughed once. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said. "It's actually pretty simple." He shook his head. "Linda, don't start." "I haven't started anything." Mom looked between us. "What happened?" David leaned forward. "I don't know what's gotten into her. I told her I needed my car and she decided to punish me." I looked at him. "Your car?" "Yes. The same car you refused to let me use when Mom needed to go to the hospital." The room went quiet. Carol's eyes moved toward David. "You did what?" David shifted in his chair. "That's not what happened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My car was at Miller's. Mom had been feeling dizzy and weak. Her doctor's office told us to come in. I asked David if I could take the Highlander." David interrupted. "I had plans. You didn't tell me that. I shouldn't have to explain every time I need my own vehicle." I nodded. "That's true." He looked surprised. Then I continued. "But you didn't say you needed it. You said, 'That's not my problem. Figure it out yourself.'" Carol stared at him. "David." He rubbed his forehead. I was frustrated. "I understand," I said, "but I still needed to get Mom to the doctor." Mom's expression had changed. She looked hurt. Not because David had refused the car, because she now understood how much I had been trying to protect her from the details. David leaned back. "So what did you want me to do, cancel everything?" "No." "Then what?" "I wanted you to help." He didn't answer. I continued. "Marilyn drove us, Mom got checked out, everything was fine." David suddenly said, "And then she wouldn't answer my calls." Carol looked at him. "She was at the hospital." "I know." "So why were you calling her?" He hesitated. "I needed the Highlander." Mom slowly put down her fork. "How many times did you call her?" David didn't answer. I did. 28. The silence that followed was almost uncomfortable enough to laugh at. Carol's mouth actually fell open. 28! David looked irritated. I wasn't keeping track. "I was," I said. He turned toward me. "You're making me sound horrible." I shook my head. "I'm not making you sound anything." That was the moment his brother Mark finally spoke. "David, man, you could have just let her use the car." David looked at him. "You don't understand." Mark shrugged. "Maybe I don't." I could see David getting angry. He stood up. "This is exactly what I mean. Linda has been telling everyone I'm some terrible husband. I didn't tell anyone. Then how does everyone know because you brought it up?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Mom looked at him. "David." He turned toward her. "When someone is sick, you help them if you can." He looked down. Mom continued. "I don't care about your car. I care about what your answer said about your heart. That landed harder than anything I could have said. David sat down again. For a few seconds nobody spoke. Then he looked at me. Are you happy now? No. That seemed to surprise him. I don't want you humiliated, I said. I wanted you to understand what happened. I understand. Do you? He nodded. I shouldn't have said it. You shouldn't have meant it either. His eyes dropped. That was the first time I saw something besides anger. Shame. Not enough to fix everything, but enough to make him quiet. After dinner, Carol helped Mom with the dishes. I went outside and sat on the back steps. The air was cool. Somewhere down the street a dog barked. A neighbor's garage door opened and closed. David came outside. He stood a few feet away. I owe you an apology. I didn't answer immediately. He sat beside me. I was angry that night. I know, I shouldn't have said what I said. No. He looked at me. No what? No, you shouldn't have. He rubbed his hands together. I don't know why I reacted that way. I looked toward the backyard. That's something you need to figure out. He nodded. Then he asked, Are you leaving me? There it was. The question I'd been avoiding. I don't know. He looked at me. That's not an answer. It is the honest answer. He was quiet. I don't want 24 years to end. Neither do I. Then what do we do? I took a breath. I think we stop pretending everything is fine. He looked down. That conversation didn't magically repair our marriage. There was no hug, no dramatic promise, no sudden transformation. We went home separately that night. In the weeks that followed, David began making changes. Small ones. He started handling his own errands. He asked about Mom's appointments. He even called her himself. But I wasn't ready to trust a few good weeks. Trust isn't rebuilt because someone feels bad. It's rebuilt because someone behaves differently when nobody is watching. I also kept my bank account. I kept my documents. I kept learning about our finances, not because I was preparing to destroy David, because I had finally learned something about myself. I could love someone and still protect my future. One Saturday morning, I drove Mom to another appointment. As I parked, she looked over at me. You and David doing better a little. She nodded. Good. Then she smiled. But don't forget what you learned. I laughed softly. I won't. She patted my hand. Good. I turned off the engine. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for my life to decide what happened next. I was part of that decision. And David was finally beginning to understand that too. Several weeks passed before I understood what those 28 missed calls had really changed. It wasn't that David suddenly became a different man. Life doesn't work that neatly. He still left cabinet doors open. He still forgot where he put his reading glasses. He still had a habit of saying, I thought you were taking care of that whenever something slipped through the cracks. But now when he said it, I didn't automatically get up and fix it. And that was new. We were still living under the same roof, but things between us had become more deliberate. David started counseling. He didn't tell me much about the sessions, and I didn't ask. One evening he came home from his appointment and stood in the kitchen while I was putting groceries away. I talked about Mom, he said. I looked over. Your counselor? Yeah. I waited. David rubbed the back of his neck. She asked why I reacted the way I did, and I didn't have a good answer. I closed the refrigerator. What did you tell her? That I was irritated? I had plans. I didn't want to change them. I nodded. That sounds honest. He gave me a tired smile. Apparently honesty isn't supposed to be comfortable. No, I said. Usually it isn't. He leaned against the counter. I told her I knew you'd figure it out. I looked at him. And that's the problem, he said. I knew you would. That sentence stayed with me because it was probably the closest thing to an apology I'd heard from him. Not I was stressed. Not you misunderstood me. Not you should have called again. Just an admission that he'd relied on my strength so completely that he'd stopped noticing the weight it carried. Still, I didn't rush back into the old routine. I had learned the difference between forgiveness and pretending. My Honda was finally repaired in early October. Miller's Auto Repair called on a Tuesday morning. It's ready, the mechanic said. I almost didn't believe him. How much he gave me the number. I winced. That's less than I expected. That's because you came prepared to cry. I laughed. Was it that obvious, Linda? You've been looking at that repair estimate like it personally insulted your family. I picked up the car that afternoon. When I pulled into the driveway, David came outside. Looks good, thank you. He looked at the Highlander. You know you can use mine anytime. I studied him. He wasn't joking. I appreciate that. He nodded. Then he went back inside. That simple offer meant more than I wanted to admit. Not because I suddenly needed his car, because he was finally offering help without being asked. A few days later, David had a minor problem of his own. His doctor changed one of his prescriptions and he needed to pick it up before the pharmacy closed. He called me from work. Could you get it? I looked at the clock. I could have. The pharmacy was 5 minutes from my office. For a second I felt the old reflex kick in. Then I thought about how far we'd come. I can't today. There was a pause. Okay, that was it. No argument, no guilt, no accusation, just okay. I smiled after we hung up. Sometimes progress is so quiet you almost miss it. A few weeks later, David asked if I would meet him for coffee. We sat at a small place near Worthington, the kind of coffee shop with wooden tables and people working on laptops in the corner. He looked nervous. I've been thinking about what happened. I figured. I called you 28 times that day. I smiled slightly. You're still counting, he laughed. No. I just remember. He looked down at his coffee. I wasn't worried about your mother enough. I didn't correct him. He continued. I was worried about my car. There it was, simple, ugly, honest. He took a breath. I don't want to be that man. I looked out the window. Then don't be. He nodded. I know. We sat quietly for a minute. Then he asked, do you still want to try? I knew what he meant. I thought about our daughter, our house, the years we'd shared, the good memories, the painful ones, the kitchen table where one careless sentence had exposed something we'd both avoided. Yes, I said finally. But slowly. He nodded. Slowly. That didn't mean everything went back to normal. Actually, I don't think I wanted normal anymore. Normal had allowed me to carry too much without questioning it. I wanted something better, something more balanced. Mom continued getting stronger. Her follow-up appointments became less frequent. One Saturday afternoon, I picked her up for lunch. She was wearing the blue sweater she'd had for years. When she got into my Honda, she looked around. So this is the famous repaired car. I laughed. Don't insult her. I'm not. She's a survivor. We stopped at a little diner in Worthington. Mom ordered chicken soup and half a turkey sandwich. I ordered pancakes. She looked at my plate. Pancakes at lunchtime? I'm an adult. I can make poor decisions. She laughed. For the first time in months, I felt completely relaxed. After lunch, I drove her home. Before she got out, she touched my arm. You know, Linda, I was worried when you told me what happened. I know. I didn't want you to throw your marriage away because of me. You didn't cause anything. She nodded. I know that now. She opened the door. Then she looked back. You know what your father used to say? I smiled. What people show you who they are in little moments. I thought about that. It was true. The big moments were easy. Anyone could promise to stand beside you when the whole family was watching. The little moments were different. A doctor's appointment, a car, a phone call, a simple request for help. That's where character showed up. And that's where mine had changed too. I used to think revenge meant making someone feel the same pain they caused me. Now I understood it differently. My revenge wasn't destroying David. It wasn't taking his car, embarrassing him, or walking away just to prove a point. It was learning that I could care about someone without carrying every responsibility for them. It was opening my own bank account, keeping my own documents, speaking honestly, and refusing to disappear just to keep peace in the house. That Wednesday morning, months after the hospital visit, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee when my phone rang. David, I answered. Hi. Hey, he said. I just wanted to see how Mom's doing. I smiled. She had a good week. Good. We talked for a few minutes. Then he said, "I'll see you tonight." Okay. When we hung up, I set my phone on the counter. No missed calls, no arguments, no emergency, just an ordinary morning. And somehow that ordinary morning felt like the biggest victory of all. I learned something during those difficult months. Sometimes the strongest response isn't making another person suffer. Sometimes it's becoming strong enough that their worst decision no longer controls your life. If you've ever been told to figure it out yourself when you needed someone most, I'd love to hear what happened in your story. And if this story meant something to you, you can stay with me for more quiet, honest stories about family, marriage, boundaries, and starting over.